States are an important part of React applications and most of the functionalities revolve around states only. But as your application grows, state updates become more and more complex. These complex state updates might get overwhelming when you revisit your code. So it's important to decide the correct approach to implement the state based on its complexity. And that's where we have another built-in hook that can be used in functional components to handle the state, and that is useReducer hook. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm nishasingla, and in today's session we are going to talk about another built-in hook in React, and that is useReducer hook. Now you must be wondering, like, we have already covered one hook, that is useState hook, that is also used to manage the state. Now why we need to use useReducer hook to manage the state? Can't we use useState hook? So you will get all your answers in this session, but just don't skip the video, watch the complete video till the end so that you understand where exactly you should use useState hook and where exactly we can use useReducer hook. So without any further ado, let's get started. So before explaining where exactly useState should use, where exactly useReducer should hook, let's first focus on useReducer hook and let's see how we can use this. So to show this useReducer hook, so to implement this useReducer hook, I will simply use a very simple to-do app where I will show you some action like add a new task in the to-do list or maybe perform delete operation. So the first thing, when you want to use useReducer hook, we have to import it the way we have imported useState hook. In the same manner, we have to import useReducer hook that will also import from a React package. Now if you remember, when we use useState hook, it returned two things, right? The state and your method that will help you to update the state. In a similar manner, when you use useReducer hook, it also returns two things. The first one is the state and the another one is the dispatch. Now this useReducer hook will take two parameters. Ideally it takes three parameters, but first we are going to talk about two parameters, that is mandatory, and the third one is optional. So the first parameter that useReducer will take is the reducer, that will be a function, and the another one is the state. If you remember, when we use useState, we use something like this, right? useState and maybe initial state. So it's very close to that. Instead of useState, you will use useReducer, but useState take only one parameter, that is your initial state. In the same manner, useReducer will also take initial state but as a second parameter, and the first parameter here will be a reducer. Now what is reducer, what exactly it is going to do, that I'll cover in a moment. Now come to this part, the way useState return two things, the state which will hold the actual state, and to manipulate this state we have this method setState. So from wherever I want to update this state, I need to call this function, right? In a similar manner, useReducer will also return two things, the current state, updated state, and to update this state we have one method dispatch. So it's very similar, right? So now we can get rid of it. I'm explaining in this way so that you can compare and you can understand the differences. Now let's talk about these two parts first of all, because to make it work we have to declare reducer and initial state, right? So I hope you understood. Initial state means the initial state with which my state is going to initialize. So it would be a simple variable. It's up to you what kind of data you want to hold. It can hold anything. So as I'm working on to-do list, so it would be an array of my list. So initially I have nothing in my to-do, so it would be empty array. Now let's talk about this reducer. What exactly a reducer? See, reducer is a pattern basically taken from the redux. So if you are not familiar with redux, in short, a reducer is basically a pure function that takes previous state and action as an argument and return the new state. So what exactly it means? It is just a simple function, right? So similarly, we create a function in the same manner, we can create this reducer function. So here, why we need that? If you remember, in the useState, whatever logic we have to write to update the state, we write it in the component itself. So now when you talk about reducer function, where exactly it's going to use? Now whenever you want to update this state, of course we will be having certain action, right? If I want to add a new list, I want to delete, or I want to update, right? There are so many state update is going to happen. So all those logic is going to maintain at one place, and that is inside this reducer. So you will not write your action at multiple places. All the logic of your state update is going to hold inside this reducer function. So this reducer function will also take two parameters. The one is the state and action. So let me quickly create this reducer function, then I'll explain you how exactly it's working. So now, as I told you, all state update is going to done inside this reducer, right? So we have to differentiate what kind of state we have to update. We want to update the state for adding a new task or deleting a task or updating a task, right? So in that case, to differentiate that, we have this action, because from the component we are going to dispatch some action. So with the help of this action type, I'm going to decide for which action I need to update the state. Fine. So here you just need to say whether it is add task or it is delete task or it is update task. So what kind of action I'm taking from UI, and for this particular action what state update I need to do. So that all logic you need to write in this reducer function itself. So let's do it for add task as of now, and at the end, of course, we'll be having a default which will just return the original state. Fine. So now whenever I'm going to add a new task, what exactly we have to do from here, that logic we have to write. But as of now, just leave it. We have this reducer ready and initial state is also ready. So instead of state, we can say here to dos, and here we can say to dos dot length, and let's see what exactly it's going to print. So you can see here it's 0. 0 means initially I have said like initial state is this, right? So this reducer is going to update this state with this initial state in the beginning, and the initial state you can see it is empty. So my to dos, which is pointing to this reducer, it is going to point to the current state, and the current state here is empty as of now. That's why there is nothing in my to do, so that's why it's 0. Now what I want to add a new to do from my UI. So for that, what I have to do, I have to create a simple form which will allow me to take the input from the user. So quickly we can create one input tag, and I can say enter, or we can say add new task. So here we can say input type text, and on blur I want to add a new to do. So just try to understand, from UI we are going to take an action that whenever on blur event is going to trigger, I want to dispatch a action. So dispatch is a function that we use to update our state. Like in useState we set state that we use to update the state, right? In a similar manner, instead of calling that, we have this dispatch function. So dispatch will just dispatch a object that will tell which action was dispatched. Okay, so here what we have to do, we have to say dispatch, and this dispatch function is going to take object and you have to pass the type. Now as I told you, to update the state, complete logic is going to handle inside this reducer, right? And in this reducer we are going to have multiple actions, right? Add, delete, update. So from component, how you will tell your reducer that I want to update my state for add task. So this type is going to help you for that. So whenever from component you are going to call dispatch, you have to mention like which action type you are passing. So I want for add task, I want to dispatch this action. So what will happen from UI, whenever on blur event will trigger, it will dispatch a action. Action means this add task. So whenever its respective reducer is going to call, this reducer will try to find out which action user has requested. So user has requested this add task. So whatever update logic you have written here, that will manipulate my state. Fine. So this way your logic is going to handle. So up to here it's clear that on this event I have dispatched a add task action, but now whenever this dispatch is going to run, I have to add a new task into my state. So that data is going to come from UI, right? Whatever I type here, it should come to my reducer to update the state. So that will be the second parameter of the dispatch, and that is the payload. So from where this payload will come, you can say here this one e.target.value. So let's revisit this code. So dispatch is just a simple method that basically help you to dispatch a action to your reducer and the corresponding payload. So dispatch will take one object, and here the first key of this object is type, which basically help us to map our action type with the reducer. So here add task will map to this one, and after that whenever this action is going to execute, if I need to pass some data from UI to my reducer, then you can pass it as a payload. So from UI, whatever user will type in this text box, it will get hold in the payload. So the way we have said action.type, in a similar manner we can say action.payload to get this data. Okay, now let's update the state. So you know that we should not mutate the state directly, we should return a new state instead, right? So what I'll do, as it is an array, I will first copy my previous state and then add a new object inside this array. As of now, let's keep only two properties, ID and name. ID we can say whatever state we have, total length plus 1. And the second one is a task name. Task name will come from this UI. Whatever I will type here, that is my to do, right? That will hold inside this payload. So the way I have action.type, in a similar manner I can say action.payload. Now let me type something. If I say reading, you can see here my to do is updated with 1. It means in my state one object has been added. So let me display this on UI so that we can see this. So I will not create any fancy UI, I will simply create a simple to do. So I will say to do's dot map and to do, and here I will just simply print it in a list format. I have two property, right, in my object. The one is IT and other one is name. So what I can do here, I can say to do dot name, save the changes, and you can see here it will display. And as we are displaying the list, so just for the optimization we have to use key property here. So here I can say to do dot id. So now let's test it again. So I said my to do list is shopping, so it will update my state also, and you can see it is displaying here also. Perfect, right? So that's how my reducer is working. So just to recall all these steps, useReducer hook is another built-in hook of React, which basically takes two parameters as a required parameter. The first one is the reducer and another one is the initial state. So here it is going to return two things, the to do that will point to my current updated state, and dispatch is the function that help me to update the state. Reducer, if I talk about, is a pure function. So all the state update now going to handle at one place instead of putting it inside functions on every event handler. Now all the state update is going to maintain at one place, and that is inside this reducer function. So from UI, if you want to get the updated state, you just need to use this to do's variable, and if you want to trigger any action so that you can update your state in the reducer, you have to dispatch an action from UI. So dispatch is just a function that help us to pass our request from UI to this reducer function. So for that, dispatch takes one object as an argument, and this dispatch takes at least one key, that is your type, because without this my dispatch will not able to understand like for which action type I have to make a request. So as it is adding a new task, so here the type should match with your type here, whatever type you will mention here, so that you can access with the help of action.type. And sometimes from UI you have to pass some data, like in this case. So in that case, dispatch can also take it as a second argument of this object, and that is your payload. So to get it on the reducer, you just need to use this action. To get the type, you need to say type. To get the payload, you have to use payload. And just make sure that reducer is a pure function, so it should not have any side effect, and all the state update should be immutable. Now let's add one more action here, that is a delete action. So now if I have added something, I should be able to delete it as well, right? So what you can do here, you can add another action here, and we can give it a name of delete task. So now from here you need to return a new state, and we have to delete the requested task from the list. Okay, so for that we can use filter method. We can say state.filter, and we can say the ID that we have in this state, if it is not equal to what we are going to pass from UI through payload, then it means it will delete from my requested list. Fine. So its action type is done. It's just like that we have to call it from my UI. So it means now we should have one delete button or delete icon in front of my to do so that I can delete that, right? So after this I will simply add a span tag, and here I can have a button. You can have your fancy icon also, but here I'm just putting a button here and giving it a name here, delete. So if you see now, you will get a delete button here. So now whenever I click on that, I need to delete this task. So now you just need to add a event here. So the way I have dispatched add task, similarly you just need to dispatch another action that will take one property of type, but this time my actions should match with this type so that this logic of my state update can execute. So the same name you have to put here so that my respective action can be dispatched. Now of course I need to pass which ID I have to delete so that I can access it like this, right? So that would be my second parameter. So here what we need to do, we need to say payload, and ID we can access through this one, todo dot ID. Quite simple, right? So now if you test this one, if I delete this reading, you can see it is deleted and my state is also updated to 2. It's just a one-time effort that you have to create this reducer, but after that it's very easy. Just keep on adding your action type and you are good to go. So this is how your simple use reducer is going to work. So one more point here, if you notice this action type I have added as a string, right? And we have to call these action type from wherever we are dispatching the action. So there is a huge possibility that we can do some mistake. If by mistake I do some typo, right, my complete redux will not work, right? I will not be able to dispatch any action. The thing is, there is a high possibility that we can do some mistake in typing, or we can accidentally do this, right? So to avoid that, the recommended way is we should use enums. Although we don't have enums in JavaScript, but we can create a similar kind of structure with the help of objects. So let's create one object with the name of to do's actions, and here we can say add task, and delete task, like this. So now instead of using it as a string, we can use to do's action dot add task, and similarly for to do's action dot delete task. And now even when we are dispatching the action, there also instead of passing it as a string, we can use our that object to call these actions type. Now you can see it's very clean and very easy to use, and it will also avoid any mistakes. There is no chance to do any mistake because we are using our objects to do so. Now let's talk about the third argument of useReducer hook. useReducer hook basically takes two arguments, reducer and initial state, as a required parameter, and we can also pass one more argument to this useReducer, that is basically called lazy initialization. And it is more preferred over simple way because in this way we can pass a init function as a third argument of useReducer. And the second argument that we have here, initial state of useReducer, will become an argument of that function. Okay, sometimes what happens, your initial state is not available and it is not ready. Sometimes we want to do some operation to get that initial state. So in that case, that logic you can have it in a function, and that function you can pass it as an argument to this useReducer. So ideally it's just a simple function that will take this initial state as an argument. And here now you can write some logic to generate the initial state, and at the end you can just return that. So now if you want to manipulate this one, as it is an array, right? So if you want, you can manipulate it as well. Suppose I said like it will return a new state that will be a combination of your original state, and you will add one more object to this one just to test. Okay, and from here I can return this one. So when you save the changes, you will notice here you will get one state by default because I have manipulated my initial state. So if you have this kind of logic that you want to get initial state from somewhere outside, or you want to generate your custom logic to generate this initial state, then this third argument is very useful because that thing you cannot do with this argument. Fine. And another use of this function is sometimes you want to reset your initial state. Maybe you want to give a reset functionality here. So at that time also this function will help you to reset your reducer state. So if you have these kind of requirement, there you can use the third argument of useReducer function, which is basically to initialize your initial state lazily. Fine. As of now I don't want this logic, it was just to show you. I just want to return my initial state. But yes, I can show you the reset functionality quickly. For that, let me add one action type here with the name of reset to dos. And here we can say reset to dos. Alright. Here of course we have to add one case just to match this reset to dos. So we can say, and now whatever init function we have, we can directly call this one and we can pass the state that I will pass from my UI. So now what we have to do, we have to dispatch a action for this action type from my UI. So you can have one button just to reset the task. So I will add it just after this one maybe. So I can have it button. And here I can have a on click, and I will call dispatch function that will take an object, and its first key will be the action type, that is to dos actions dot reset. And the another argument of this one, because I have used payload here, so I have to pass the payload also. So payload will be what? Payload will be your initial state, that is my empty array. So now what will happen, that from UI when I click on this reset button, it will dispatch this action reset and pass my initial state, which is the empty array. So this will call my this action type, and it will call my init function with this state that I am passing, that is an empty array. So in this case it will be empty array that will return empty array, so it will completely reset my reducer initial state. If you have worked with Redux, in that case we always initialize our state with initial state, right? So still we have a hold on our initial state, but in useReducer we don't have initial state in the reducer scope. Fine. So this is very handy when you want to reset your reducer state. So just make sure you have written it from here. Now let's test this one. Is it working fine? We can have some random to dos in the list. And if you test delete is working, and if you click on this reset, ideally it should reset my complete reducer state to empty array, and here we go. So this third argument of useReducer is very handy when you have some custom logic or you want to do some calculation for initializing your state. So in that case, that logic you can handle in this function. So just make sure that if you don't pass this third argument to use this useReducer hook, in that case your reducer will get initialized with this variable. Okay, your initial state will be this. But as soon as you have mentioned the third argument here, then your useReducer or your reducer will use this function to get the initial state. So here this will act like an input for this init function. So I hope you understood the role of this function. So now this is all about useReducer hook. It may look that you have to write lots of code here, but now just try to understand where exactly we should use useState and where should we use useReducer. See, if you have a very simple state like primitive type, string, array, boolean, in that case useState hook is sufficient and you should use only that hook. But when your state become complex like arrays and objects, so in that case handling it with useState can be little tough because you have to write lots of logic, and in that case your handler function become very clumsy because you have to write lots of state update there. So in that case your components are not clean. But if in this case, if you see here, my to dos component is quite clean because I am just dispatching the action from here. What exactly how my state is going to update, that is not my component job, right? I will just dispatch the action, and now my reducer will take care about the logic for updating the state. So useReducer is very handy where you have complex state, and if your state is dependent on the previous state. So if you have these kind of requirement, there you should use useReducer hook. Otherwise, for the simple states, stay with useState hook, that is okay. Again, it's totally depend on your practice what hook you want to use, but if you take care about these best practices, where you should use, where you should not, then it will help you to write the clean code. This function is pure function, so it's easy to test as well. As of now, everything we have in a same file. You can keep it in a separate file also. So I just wanted to show you one thing. Maybe I want to take out this logic from this component and I want to keep it in a separate file. Okay, so just want to show you something here. For that, let's create one more component inside this useReducer, and maybe let's give it a name of to-do list. Let's quickly create this component. So now whatever logic I have here, I'll take it from here and I will put it here. It will not work as of now, but let me first complete this one. Let's first import this component, that is to do. Okay, and here now we can call this one. We haven't exported it yet, so we need to say export default to-do list. So still it will not work, because if you notice, to-do list need to-dos and these actions and dispatch, right? So just to make it work, what we have to do, we have to pass to-dos from here as a prop, and another one is a dispatch method. Now we have passed it, but we have to read it from here, so we can say to-dos and dispatch. So these two are solved. Now we have this action type also we have to pass. So ideally action type we can simply export it from here, right? This actions type you can put in a separate file. As of now, I will just mark it export so that I can import from here. You will notice now it is done. Let's test this one once. Let me add few tasks here. Let's test the functionality. If I delete, it will work. If I reset, it will reset. Perfect. So it will work fine, right? So this way you can clean. You can put your reducer also in a separate file, right? Now one point I just want to show you, like to-do list is a separate component, right? But it will not work until unless I don't pass this dispatch and to-dos. So similarly, if you have created a useReducer hook and if your application is quite complex, then definitely you will have lots of nested components. And suppose you have an innermost component that want to dispatch some action. So in that case, your component should pass this dispatch to that innermost component. So in this case, you have to pass your state and dispatch action to all the child components so that I can dispatch the action or I can read the state. So this passing down the props to all the child components, this is called prop drilling, right? And if you have so much nesting components, in that case it would really a headache to pass all the props. At least in this case, these two things are required to all the child components. So to avoid this, we have a concept of use context hook, and that's what we are going to cover in the next video. What is use context? And there I will use the useReducer along with use context so that I can show you how it will help you to eliminate this part. You don't need to pass down these to-dos and dispatch to the nested components. So when you use useReducer hook with use context hook, then it is really powerful. So this is all for today, and in the next video we are going to talk about a use context hook, and it is going to be very interesting. So stay connected and don't forget to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss the important updates from my channel. See you in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye.